So Nikon and Canon have come to the table with a couple of new cameras, with the ZR and C50. Both have impressive spec sheets, so should Sony users like myself be running scared or even look to switch? Well, these answers are never straightforward to find, but I think Sony will have the answer right up their sleeves. So if history tells us anything, a bit of competition in the market is a good thing. Yes, we see impressive features from both Nikon and Canon of late, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's all over for Sony. Far from it. Now, I've been using the FX6, A7s III and the A7 IV for years now. They do exactly what I want them to do for my TV work. Yes, none of them are perfect, but I can quite easily do my day job with all three. However, what the Nikon ZR and the Canon C50 do demonstrate is that technology is moving forwards, and the common themes between both cameras are that they have much bigger sensors than, say, the A7S or the FX3, well, from a megapixel perspective anyway. Yes, there's still full-frame sensors, and the Nikon is a 6K camera offering 6K RAW internally, albeit some of those file sizes are going to approach almost 4,000 megabits per second. And that's going to be some processing power and hard drive space needed if you want to do anything with those files. And the Canon C50, well, that's offering 7K RAW, but with OpenGate as a possibility, giving the user the ability to utilize the full sensor, albeit with a caveat, because at the moment you can only use OpenGate in 7K mode. Again, these file sizes, well, they'll be sizable. We're looking at around 2,500 megabits per second with these, so they're not small. But of course, these are headline-grabbing stats, and realistically, most of us won't utilize such settings. But I think we can all agree that they're nice to have. But the biggest sell for the Nikon ZR is the collaboration with Red, because they bought the company recently, and getting something close to red color science, albeit you could probably consider it to be red light, is a nice coup for the company, and will have many giving this one a second look. But ergonomically, the Nikon ZR is very similar to compact cameras like the Sony ZV-E10, and even this, the Sony ZV-1. As we all know, the smaller the camera, the harder it is to control and also navigate, especially if you have big hands like myself. But this video isn't about bashing cameras from other companies. It's about what Sony need to do to keep up with the competition. What do you think they need to do in their next line of cameras? What do you want to see in the FX3, A7S, A7 V? Drop me a note in the comments. Now, we could get something announced later this year from Sony, but equally, or probably more likely, we could have cameras announced in 2026. But we must also remember that quality has always got to come before rush and desperation. Just because other cameras have been released doesn't mean that Sony need to announce something, well, tomorrow. But as I mentioned in a previous video, this is the longest period between releases of, say, for example, the A7S II and the move to the A7S Mark III, as that was released in September 2020. And I would argue that's because we're about to see another leap in technology, or at least we should, if the desire is to have the new A7S or FX3 replacement have 6K recording, because that will need to have a bigger sensor, well, from a higher pixel count perspective anyway. But of course, if you're anything like me, you'd want to see the great low light capability of the A7S III or the FX3, because I've become accustomed to shooting clean images in 12,800 ISO in S-Log, and anything short of that, well, it's going to be a major step down. So therefore, I think we need to see a new affordable sensor that can give us this option. And there's only one company that can do this, and it's the company that makes sensors for most devices on the market, and that's Sony. Now, as I've always maintained, Sony's current lineup of cameras are quite brilliant. Yes, the company have cut corners in certain places and even dumbed down, well, some of their cameras to ensure that there's a hierarchy, which has ended up being a little bit muddled, because sometimes you can see the newer, cheaper cameras get new features that the flagships don't actually have. But that's another discussion for another day. Also, for example, the poor quality of LCD screens has often been a frustration, and things like rolling shutter on the A7 IV do get a bad rep. But aside from gripes like this, I always find that the Sony devices are exactly what we need. But with that said, you don't really get anywhere by standing still. Both Nikon and Canon have shown their hands and their vision for the future, if you like, so now it's time for Sony to bring theirs. So, for example, in the new FX3 or A7s, as I mentioned earlier, I want to see the same brilliant low light quality. Seeing in the dark is it's the selling point of these devices. Shooting at 12,800 ISO in S-Log is a game changer. However, you can't upgrade to 6 or 8K without adding to the pixel count, and that's the genius of these 12 megapixel sensors. The pixels on the sensor are large enough to capture all of that light. So to increase the sensor to, say, for example, 24 or 30 plus megapixels, you're probably going to lose that low light capability. So the gauntlet is thrown down. Can Sony introduce a larger megapixel sensor that can give us that 6 or 8K capability along with that great low light quality? And on the subject of open gate, is it really necessary? Well, not totally, but to get the opportunity to use the full sensor would be good for us for sure, but not just in 6 or 8K mode. Well, we'd like to have it in all modes if possible. And from a personal perspective, working in sport, a solid 4K 240 frames a second would also be nice. And could we get something like 6K 60 included? But would that be a step too far, do you think? And things like a global shutter would be quite expensive. But let me know what you think of this. Would you pay whatever it takes to get a global shutter? Look, I think we all have our own wish lists, and some of what I've just said could be pure fantasy. Or is it? But getting back to the original question, do Sony users need to panic because Canon and Nikon have released new cameras? Well, certainly not. At least I'm not panicking. Whatever happens in the future, we will see new Sony cameras, a new FX3 or equivalent, an A7 IV, and even a replacement for the FX6, and I have every confidence they will be rather good. So the opposition, in this case Canon and Nikon, well, I guess they've shown their hands, and for me there's always lots of noise and showboating going on between camera companies who can have the bigger headlines. And do you know what? If they can do it, then why not? But sometimes you just have to take a step back and start asking a few questions. And for the clients I have, they just don't care about raw recording. They just want nice, clean images, and the Sonys just deliver this, even if something like the A7s III is 5 years old this month. So that means, first and foremost, we need cameras that deliver quality, just as the current crop do. And that consistency of tech is what we all want to see. However, there are still plenty of questions to be asked about bigger sensors, open gate, high frame rates, bigger screens, low light capability, low rolling shutter, better IBIS, built-in ND filters, a global shutter. I mean, the list is endless. But regardless of our wish lists, well, the focus now falls upon Sony. And you know what? The camera world will be looking and expecting. But I'll look on the positive side, and I think what's on the way has the potential to blow our minds. Or at least I hope. So, I guess it's Sony, over to you. Speak to you soon.